Welcome into the Flow is Being podcast, a podcast dedicated to speaking on mental health, philosophy, spirituality, and more. On this episode, I'm going to speak about OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. What exactly is OCD? What are the misconceptions that we have about it? How does one overcome this condition? And essentially, how do you live a more fulfilled life with OCD? I hope you enjoy. Okay, so what exactly is OCD? Obsessive compulsive disorder is much more than people think. Misconceptions in the media involve, continuous hand washing, putting things in order, having to have pencils aligned in a certain way on your desk. When you're creating a piece of art, every shape, every piece has to be in exact order. That's kind of the misconceptions we see in popular culture, in the media, TV, movies, music, social media, all of that. Those are the misconceptions we see today. OCD is much, much more than a need to feel organized, a need to feel tidy, and to have things in perfect order. Obsessive compulsive disorder is actually much more than people think. I would say it's unwanted thoughts, urges, emotions, images that a person experiences, and then their need to get rid of those thoughts, urges, images, feelings. And the need to get rid of these feelings is really where the suffering occurs. The obsession might be a thought that pops into their head that goes against their values, against their character. And the compulsion would then be, how do I get rid of this thought? How do I prevent XYZ from happening because of this thought? And this really sends the sufferer down a pretty much infinite spiral that is hard to get out of. OCD is actually not a thought disorder because everybody in the population has thoughts that pop into their head. And I don't like the term intrusive thoughts because that gives off the feeling that you need to get rid of this thought. So I just say all thoughts are thoughts, right? So the sufferer of OCD does not have a thought disorder. It's actually a feeling disorder. They are feeling these thoughts much more than the average person does. So the average person without OCD can have the exact same thought of somebody with OCD. We'll use an example of, imagine you're at work, you're in a very important meeting, you have a presentation that you have to do, you're sitting around a table with a bunch of executives, bosses, and all of a sudden a thought pops into your head. You don't have OCD. That what if I stood up on this desk right now, waved my hands in the air, called everybody an offensive word, started screaming and shouting, lost control, and security came in and escorted me out. That thought pops into your head. You say, okay, that's a thought. Whatever. I'm going to continue with my day. Great. The person with OCD could be in that exact same meeting, have the same thought of standing up on the desk, losing control, shouting obscenities, blah, 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 blah. They feel this thought much more than the person without OCD. So now they're more concerned of, oh crap, what if I actually do this? I can't do this. If I do this, I'm at risk of losing my job. I'm at risk of seeming like a crazy person. I'll definitely be reprimanded. I'll be escorted out for disrupting the meeting. I will have to then find a new job. It's going to be tough to find a job. Holy crap. And what they're doing is they're feeling these emotions. Now, a lot of people think it's just anxiety. Yes, it is an anxiety disorder. But you are now tying an emotional response with the thought. So that emotional response could be anger, sadness, guilt, and anxiety. So the feeling aspect that I'm getting at is the person with OCD in that meeting who had that thought that goes against their character. Now they're wrestling with a feeling of intense anxiety or guilt or shame or sadness, anger, resentment at why would I have that thought? And now they're trying to dissect, what does that mean? Do I actually want to do it? So they have now paired a pretty bizarre, harmless thought of standing on the desk and doing something out of the ordinary. Out of the ordinary. They have now paired that thought with an emotional signal. And that emotional signal comes from the amygdala, the center of our brain, which is in charge of the flight or fight response. Okay? So that's why I say it's a feeling disorder. Everybody has random, weird thoughts all the time. The reason the human brain does have random, weird thoughts is because the human brain is basically just a what-if machine. It's always looking and scoping out the surroundings, saying, what if I did this, or what if this happens? The human brain is a planner. It's planning for the future. It's using the past as a reference, and it's making sure that your present moment is successful so you survive into the future, right? So early humans in the savannah in Africa would hear a rustling noise in the bushes. That would trigger the amygdala for looking in the bushes and understanding that that could be a tiger, a lion. That could be danger right there. And so now they're in fight or flight or freeze. So basically they are in a state of panic. Do I run away? Do I stay here and freeze and submit and try to hide? Or do I try to fight this predator? So that comes back to basic human biology for why we have the amygdala and how it is very useful, and how anxiety and guilt and shame and sadness and anger, all these emotional responses are very useful, and they are just emotional responses trying to protect us. Okay. So the sufferer of OCD has a thought of standing on the desk, disrupting the meeting, and now they're off to the races trying to figure out what does it mean, because they have now paired that thought with an emotional response. So what they might do in that situation is try to leave the meeting to prevent that from happening, prevent them from getting on the desk. They will then possibly search and see, what does it mean that I had this thought? Am I going crazy? Am I a bad person? Does this mean I am losing my mind? They're now off to the races trying to figure out, why did I have this emotional response to this thought? Because if I had an emotional response to this thought, that probably means that there's something I need to figure out. Okay? Logic does not play a factor in any of this. And the paradoxical component to this whole situation that this person's going through is, the more they look up what this thought means, or if they would do it, and if they ruminate on, I wouldn't do this, and they're trying to find certainty. The paradox of doing all that research, leaving the meeting, trying to avoid the situation from happening. They are now giving fuel to OCD to continue to grow. Now the spiral is spinning, and the suffering is actually not the thought. The suffering has now turned into this spinning wheel that they cannot get off of. And that's really at the heart of OCD. It's a very complicated disorder. There's a tremendous amount of suffering that comes with OCD. Myself, I do have OCD, which is why I can consider myself at this point pretty much an expert on what's going on in the brain, how to feel better, and really how to live a life where this does not interfere. So I've experienced many different themes, and we're going to now segue into that. So the misconceptions in the media are that, person with OCD is very concerned with germs. They touch doorknobs and they have to sanitize their hands immediately, or they pull out a handkerchief and they have to cover the doorknob in order to open it. They have to have all of their things in order to feel better. They have to be in control. And yes, those are true. Those are themes within the wide, vast array of themes in OCD, but that's just the surface. Those are outward compulsive things. So when I say that, those are physical compulsions where, let's say a person's scared of germs, they touch a doorknob because they're scared of catching a deadly virus. Now they have to sanitize their hands 50 times because they have to be 100% sure that they did not catch a virus or a bacteria. They need to be 100% sure. Those are all true. But popular media has misconstrued what OCD actually is. It's debilitating. People who suffer from it without getting help cannot live normal lives. Most of them cannot hold jobs, cannot be social, and the torment that goes along with it is tremendous. Lots of rates of suicide within OCD, lots of people feeling hopeless. So all those things are true. But what you see on social media of I'm so OCD, I have to have all my stuff in order. I'm so OCD, I have to have my desk straightened out or else I'm going to go crazy. Those people don't necessarily have OCD. They're just using that term OCD to give meaning to something that's completely different. So what OCD actually is these fears, and the sufferer does compulsions to avoid the fear in order to gain certainty that they will not get sick from that doorknob. They will not act out on this thought. They will not kill somebody. They will not lose control and start harming people. They will not think of something magical and it will come true if they think that thought. They will not, if they are praying to God, they will not have blasphemous thoughts pop into their head because then God will strike down on them. So let's get into some of the themes. Some of the more known themes are, harm OCD. That's somebody obsessing of a thought popped into their head. Maybe they were watching a film, like a horror movie. Maybe they read something about a serial killer, and then the thought pops into their head, what if I could do that? Am I capable of doing that? And then somebody with harm OCD now starts to research if they would ever hurt somebody, because it's ego dystonic. It goes against who they actually are. So at the core, that person's very sensitive, very caring, very intellectual, intelligent. Now they're off to the races trying to figure out what that thought means, because once again, it's a feeling disorder they're feeling these thoughts much more than the average person without OCD. The average person without OCD can have the exact same thoughts and then 5 minutes later forget about them and go about their day. So harm OCD involves not just physical harm, emotional harm. Somebody could have a fear of, what if I said an offensive word to somebody? What if I shout something obscene? What if I harm somebody emotionally by insulting them and they didn't expect it? And then, there's the physical side. A mother might fear that, oh crap, I might drown my daughter when I'm giving her a bath. And so now they're off to the races trying to figure out if they would really do it. Other themes, magical thinking is another popular theme. Somebody might think, if I think of my parents getting in a car crash, that means it's actually going to happen. So I cannot think this thought. They try to rid themselves of the thought. They might think, if I think of my parents dying in a car crash, now I need to snap my fingers 3 times in order for that not to happen. So every time they think that thought, now the compulsion is 1, 2, 3, snapping their fingers, 1, 2, 3. And so they have now started to pacify themselves with the snapping of the fingers so that their parents don't die in a car crash. Contamination OCD, of course, which is more physical compulsions, which is, if I touch this surface, I could get sick, so I need to go wash my hands immediately. That grows into people not able to leave their house, not able to go out in public because they're scared to touch surfaces. They wear gloves. A lot of people don't leave the house because they're scared that they might contract diseases. And so that's another theme. Scrupulosity, more religious base OCD, where somebody might be very devout to their religion, and every time they pray, thoughts pop into their head of, saying blasphemous statements towards God. And so they're scared to pray because they don't want those things to happen. And then those compulsions might be, now they avoid praying, they avoid going to church, and they try everything they can to not have these thoughts. Another theme or themes might be sensory motor OCD, where the sufferer is worried that they might be aware of a bodily function forever, and now they're trying so hard not to pay attention to that bodily function, blinking, swallowing, breathing, pretty much anything you can think of. So now the compulsion is to stay away from the compulsion is thinking that being aware of those things is not normal. Therefore, if they're aware of those things, they're trapped and they can't get out. And now they're trying so hard to feel quote unquote normal again. Other themes such as, health OCD, health anxiety OCD. A sufferer might feel a sensation in their chest, and now they're worried that, oh crap, does this mean I'm having a heart attack? And then they start researching the feelings that they're feeling. They start putting meaning to those feelings. The body actually sends more physical sensations to that part of the body. Now they're going to doctors to get reassurance. Doctors might tell them everything's fine, and they don't believe the doctor because an OCD sufferer needs 100% certainty. And we'll get into that here soon. So there's quite an array of themes. Basically, whatever the person can be scared of can be a theme. It could be the most bizarre things ever. I've experienced harm OCD, I've experienced contamination OCD, sensory motor OCD, and basically that's heightened anxiety, and usually in times of stress where the body is, you know, the brain is just trying to cope. And so its way of coping is trying to find certainty, which ultimately is trying to gain control. Okay. So, how does somebody with OCD really overcome the condition? Now, there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of missteps on really what to do. When I first started experiencing like OCD, and when I say OCD, a lot of people worry about stuff all the time who don't have OCD. They might worry about, I have this presentation and I don't want to mess up, so that, they ruminate about it. They might worry about a trip that they're having and they hope everything goes well, and they hope that, on this trip that nothing bad happens, that they're safe. They might leave their house and worry that, oh shit, did I leave something plugged in that could cause a fire? Like, those are normal. When you get to the OCD stage, it becomes all consuming. So the thought of, if I leave my house and, oh shit, did I leave something plugged in that could burn the house down? Did I leave the stove on? The person with OCD cannot stop thinking about that, and they'll probably go back and check, and then they'll leave again, and then the thought will pop up, well, what if you actually didn't turn off the stove? Then they'll go back. The problem with the checking aspect of OCD, once you check probably like 5 or 6 times, the brain actually forgets that you checked in the first place, which is why that cycle of rumination and worry will just continue to spin out of control. That 5th or 6th time of, did I lock the door? Did I turn off the stove? And going back to check, that has now locked in that fear so much that that person might spend 2 hours, 3 hours going back and forth checking, because at this point, like, the brain cannot recognize what actually happened and what did not. And just real quick, other themes that I forgot to mention are what is it? It's an event that you might have thought actually happened, but it actually didn't. So you might have left an event, left a social situation, and now the brain wonders, did I say this? Did I do this? Did I pick up my glass of water and dump it on my friend's head when we were having lunch? And the sufferer might say no. And this is called false event OCD, where now the sufferer worries if they actually did something that they actually didn't. So now they might wonder, we'll use that example. Did I dump a glass of water on my friend's head when we were having lunch? Oh, no, of course I didn't. I wouldn't do that. But did I? No. And then they try to think back to the lunch. I don't think I did, but I can't be sure. And so the compulsion then is they call their friend and they try to get reassurance. Did I do something weird today at lunch? And the friend will say, no, it was not that I can think of. Okay, cool. They hang up the phone, and then it pops into their head. Are you sure you didn't do that? Maybe they're just trying to be nice. And so now they're on an endless spiral trying to figure out if they did something. This can go into pretty much anything. Did I burn a house down? Did I run over somebody? It's almost endless. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So how do we get, how does one gain control and get their life back? Well, going to talk to somebody who's a therapist specializing in OCD is helpful, because if you talk to somebody who doesn't specialize in OCD, this is going to dig a hole much deeper than you think. If you go to a traditional therapist who has no training in OCD, you're going to say, hey, I had this thought that, what if I'm a serial killer? And, I was watching this horror movie. I saw like a gruesome scene. The killer ran up and stabbed somebody and slit their neck. And then a thought popped into my head, what if I could do that? And so if, and that's just a thought. I won't even call it intrusive. It's just a thought the brain has, right? The brain is a creative machine, and it's always wondering what if and this and that, right? So a traditional therapist will then try to dissect the thought and give meaning to it, and giving meaning to these thoughts, because once again, logic does not matter with OCD. The fact of the matter is the amygdala is malfunctioning, and it's pairing a thought with an emotional response, usually distress, right? So by dissecting a thought that in the first place doesn't mean anything, now you're climbing into a hole of trying to figure out the meaning behind these thoughts. So a traditional therapist will have you talk about, what is, you had this thought, let's try to dive deeper into it. Maybe there's some subconscious reason why you feel like you're a serial killer, or if you could do this. And that therapist who's not trained in OCD might then worry about, is this going to happen? Is this person going crazy? They might alert the authorities, when in reality, it's just a thought that pretty much everybody has. Everybody wonders about everything because that's the brain. It's wondering. So when you go to somebody trained in OCD, they're not going to give meaning to these thoughts because they understand what's actually going on. They know that you're at the core a very sensitive, caring person, and you're just overreacting to a simple thought that you had no control of in the beginning. So if you tell your OCD therapist, this is the thought that I had, and now I'm wondering, what if I could do this? Am I capable of it? I can't stop thinking of what if I could hurt somebody and kill somebody like I saw on the screen. They're not going to sit there and say, well, let's try to dive deeper into this thought. Let's try to figure it out. What they're going to say is, and they're not going to give you reassurance if that's what you're looking for. They're not going to say, oh, no, you would never do that. Come on. You're a nice person. Don't worry about it. It's just a thought, put it aside. You would never do that. Because when you give somebody reassurance like that, OCD wants 100% certainty, and then it will feel better. You'll feel better for a little bit. Right? Just like when you called your friend about, did I actually dump water on their head? You'll feel better for a little bit because the anxiety goes down. But then OCD will start doubting if that's actually the truth. And then you're back on the spiral. So the OCD therapist will not reassure you that you're not going to kill somebody and that you're not going to be a serial killer. What they're going to work hard to do is let you live in a world where that possibility does exist and have you get as comfortable with it as you can. And they'll probably recommend that you watch that movie 10 more times, that you research serial killers, and that you look at gruesome videos just to habituate your mind to the fact that, look, I'm not going to tell you that you couldn't do that, because they're dealing with probabilities and possibilities, right? The probability is pretty low that you're going to be a serial killer just because you saw a gruesome scene in a movie. Okay. But the possibility does exist, right? Anybody at any time can lose control and do something out of their character, hurt somebody, whatever. We don't have the keys to the future. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen next. So the goal is to expose you to your fear as much as possible. If your fear is becoming a serial killer, like in this example, they're going to have you watch and read as much stuff as you can, read Stephen King books, read articles about people getting murdered, this and that, and then avoid the compulsion, which is looking up to see if you are this, or ruminating on the fact that could I be, I don't think I am, could I be. You now need to avoid doing that, which is very difficult, and live in a world where you're actually uncertain if you would, right? So exposure and response therapy is exposing yourself to fears and responding in a different way, which means not responding with an emotional distress signal. And how do we do that? It's actually pretty hard, but once you grasp it, you can understand. Okay. So a guy I really like who stuck out to me in my path is Dr. Jonathan Grayson, a psychologist. You know, he recognizes that ERP, exposure response therapy, is the gold standard of treatment for somebody to get better, right? But you need to pair exposure and response therapy with uncertainty. Okay. So a lot of people doing ERP, they're thinking, you know, when I expose myself, let's say in the case of like contamination, they're going to ask you to hold a dirty trash can or go to an airport and touch as many things as you can and then not wash your hands, right? But the person doing the therapy who's scared of germs, touching all these things, and then their anxiety spikes really high, a lot of the time the misconception is, you know, I'm touching all these things and the goal is to teach myself that I will not get sick. Or the goal is to watch a horror movie and teach myself that actually wouldn't happen, right? But that's incorrect. The goal of these exposures is to teach the brain that you actually could get sick, that you actually could be a serial killer. And a lot of people misunderstand that. So they'll do an exposure and they'll be like, oh, look, I touched all this stuff. I didn't wash my hands and I didn't get sick and I feel a lot better. What Dr. Grayson really stresses is you could touch all these things and there's a chance you won't get sick, but then there is actually a chance that you could get sick, right? If you have magical thinking OCD, and like the example before, you have thoughts that, you know, if I don't snap my fingers 3 times, my parents will die in a car crash, right? So you need to get comfortable living in a world where if you don't snap your fingers 3 times, if you avoid doing that and you still have the thought, your parents could still die in a car crash, right? Or let's say it's like the opposite of that. You know, if I snap my fingers 3 times, then they will die in a car crash. So I have to avoid any kind of snapping or touching my fingers because they could die in a car crash. So the therapist who's trained in OCD and understands uncertainty can then tell you, you're going to snap your fingers 3 times and think about your parents dying in a car crash, but understand that they still could die in a car crash tonight, right? So we're pairing all these exposures also with the uncertainty of things could happen, because and I'm telling you this as a person with OCD, the bare bones of OCD is being so uncomfortable with possibilities, right? It's not the thoughts themselves or the feelings or the urges, the anxiety. It's the feeling of I don't have control. And so the possibility of this happening is so disgusting to me that I'm going to do everything I can so that that possibility never happens. We see it with health anxiety. They might feel a sensation in their body and they might look up, what does this mean? Oh crap, do I have cancer? And then they go see a doctor. The doctor tells them they don't, they get reassurance, and then it comes back. They're back on the loop, right? That person's actually not scared of that initial thought. They're scared of the possibility existing that they could die from whatever ailment they think they have. So the goal of exposure response paired with uncertainty is to teach that person that you could have a feeling in your chest of, what if this means I'm going to have a heart attack, or I have, cancer, or you name it, right? The goal is to have that person exposed to that feeling and that fear, and then also to live with the fact that, that could be the case. You need to get comfortable with the possibility that that sensation could be what you're scared of, and you could die of it, right? Because we live in a world full of possibilities. So at the heart of it, it's uncertainty of possibilities happening, right? Because like I say, there's only two things that I am certain of in my life, right? Only two. And once you grasp this, if you have OCD yourself, this is going to pretty much be, like an antidote to what you're going through. I'm only certain that I'm going to die, right? That's 100% certainty. I will die. And the other thing I'm certain of is that I'm certain of nothing else, right? So I put that second one on there because it's basically like putting the nail in the coffin. You could just say, I'm certain that I'm going to die and that's it. But for somebody with OCD, you need to really put the nail in the coffin, right? And saying, I'm certain that I'm going to die, but I'm also certain that I'm certain of nothing else. So that really puts the nail in the coffin. And then everything else I'm uncertain of. I'm uncertain of when I'm going to die. I'm uncertain of what I will say. I'm uncertain of what could happen in the future. I'm uncertain of what could happen to other people. I'm uncertain of thoughts and if this would happen, if that will happen. Living a life not knowing what's going to happen next is really the key on your path to recovery. And the next thing I want to get into is OCD is essentially an addiction to perceived certainty. Let me say that again. OCD is essentially an addiction to perceived certainty. If the only two things I'm certain of is that I'm going to die and that I'm certain of nothing else, everything out of those two possibilities, those two certainties, is just perceived certainty, right? The probabilities are very low that somebody would be a serial killer because they saw a scene on TV. The probability is pretty low that somebody could have a thought of standing up on a desk and shouting obscene things. The probability is pretty low that if they snap their fingers 3 times, their parents will die in a crash. The probability is pretty low if you touch something that might be contaminated, that you'll die from a deadly disease. But the possibilities certainly do exist, right? So we're basically just playing a math game with OCD. Is this possible? Sure. Is it very probable? Probably not, but it's not impossible, okay? So think of certainty, perceived certainty as a pie, right? It's a pie that just came out of the oven. You slice it into 8 pieces, and an OCD sufferer who has unwanted thoughts or feelings or urges, images pop in their head, and then they work so hard to get rid of them. They're trying hard to gain certainty that that thought or image or feeling sensation will not come true. And so every time they look for reassurance with, Googling something, researching, calling a friend, a family member, asking them, do you think I would ever do this? Do you think this could ever happen? And then the person on the other line says, oh, no, come on, you're a good person. You would never do that. You would never say that, or, this would never happen. If you snap your fingers, that's ludicrous. That would never happen. Every time they are given that reassurance, they're taking a slice of that perceived certainty pie and they're getting high on it. It's no different than a Coke addict snorting a line of Coke. It's a perceived happiness, but it's not real happiness. And once it wears off, they're going to go right back to it. So OCD is essentially an addiction to perceived certainty. And once we start living in a world of uncertainty and not just saying, I'm living in a world of uncertainty, really changing your beliefs to where, you're scared of harming somebody because you saw something on TV, you're scared of saying something obscene. The thing you need to do is go into those situations on purpose. Put yourself in situations where you could do things, where you could think things, where you could get sick, or you could do this or say this or feel this. As uncomfortable as they are, do those, but also embrace possibility that you're uncertain if those will actually occur. This takes a lot of work. And once you do that, you are going to start to feel better. You are going to start to overcome this condition. And that looks like being better than you were before, because the average person without OCD sucks at accepting uncertainty. The average person without OCD still worries about getting in a plane, and they might ruminate about what if this plane crashes, and they might still be scared of all these possibilities. You just become a master of, I felt a sensation in my body. It doesn't feel good. I could go look it up right now, and I could go down this path of what if it's this disease or this disease, and how do I get better, and what's my plan of option and treatment. You could go down that path. Or in that moment, you feel a sensation in your body and you just say, I could die from cancer. This could be a tumor. This could be something serious, and I could die from it. I'm uncertain if I could or could not, but I'm not going to look it up, and I'm going to go about my day. The more you do that, the more you start embracing uncertainty, the less and less the brain will send those thoughts and signals, and then the amygdala will stop reacting. And before you know it, your brain will rewire itself and you will feel better. So another aspect before we end this podcast episode is mindfulness. People hear mindfulness and they think, I can't sit there with my thoughts, and, I'm too ADD. I can't pay attention. I can't focus. Well, that's not true, because you always are focusing and you always are paying attention. You're just not noticing it quite as much. So where it comes into play with OCD is really understanding uncertainty and then being able to tap into that uncertainty with focus. And if that means sitting there meditating on the breath, that's fine. Allow thoughts to come, allow them to go. Do not label thoughts as thoughts. That's a trick a lot of people fall into. Once you label a thought as a thought, you are doing a compulsion. You are pushing that thought away. You are just, it's a form of avoidance when you label a thought, maybe it's unwanted or not, as, oh, that's just a thought. I'm going to go about my day. That's fine. If you have OCD, though, it's going to come right back. So the best thing to do is have that thought. Don't label it as a thought. Just be in the moment with the thought, and then be mindful of the thought and tell yourself, I'm very uncertain if this thought will come true. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. And that's all you have to do. And the more you redundantly, repetitively do that, the less and less you'll suffer. So for me, it's been realizing the goal of meditation is that there is no you to realize anything in the first place. And that's a heavy thing for people to hear, but it's actually quite simple. I can look at a tree in nature and I can look at it through the lens of myself. This is me seeing the tree, right? The tree is there. I am here. The more Eastern mindful approach is, there's the tree. I am seeing it, but there actually is no I. It's just the awareness that I am is experiencing the tree. And if you apply that to OCD, I'm having an unwanted thought. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. I'm very unsure if I will figure this out, or if I'll put meaning to this, or if I'll do something about it. But I am just going to be aware of it. I'm not going to try to push it away. I'm going to accept it. And I'm going to live in a world, I'm choosing right now to live in a world where I am unsure of what will happen next. That is a strong remedy for OCD, and that will lead you on the path to ultimately feeling better. If anybody has any questions about OCD or anything else related in this episode that you might have heard, please feel free to put a comment down below, send me a message, and I will help you as much as I can. Have a great day.